This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to the Golden Pathway Zoom meeting on increasing your light in the world. I'm Patricia Parham, your host, and our speaker today is Reverend Sidney Bennett, who's been a student of the Ascended Masters for over 50 years and a minister in our church, the Church Universal and Triumphant, for 33, which is as long as I've been in the teachings. He served on staff at the Summit Lighthouse in Los Angeles and Montana, and co-led with his wife, Joy, teaching centers in Boston and Immigrant, Montana. He's an elder. He has been an elder of the Church Universal and Triumphant and a member of the board of directors, one for 19 and 12 years respectively. And in 2020, he published a compilation of some of his sermons. His book is entitled Practicing Sainthood, Walking the Path of Your Ascension. And I'm sure that in order to do that, you have to express some joy, which is the title of our session today, Exude Joy. So one way to increase your light in the world is to increase your joy. Do you realize that all of our emotions are a choice and that you can choose in any moment and time to feel any emotion that you want to feel? So you can be joyful at any moment in time. Think about things that bring you joy. What might they be? Smile of a child, a rainbow, doing things for others. The list is kind of long, but the question is, can we truly be joyous when there's so much suffering in the world right now? And what is the relationship between joy and sorrow? Let's explore what joy is and how to express more of it. If others feel your joy, you are increasing your light in the world. And Sidney has asked that we ask questions as we have them and not wait till the end of his presentation like we normally do. So feel free to raise a hand or say, excuse me, when he takes a breath and make a comment about joy or ask a question. Welcome, Sidney. So glad.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here. And I think hopefully most of you know what today is, which is Wesak, which is the birthday of Gautama Buddha we celebrate. And of course, the keynote or the musical keynote for Gautama Buddha is Ode to Joy. And it's no coincidence. So the question always seems to come up, at least it did with me for a long time, how can I be happy in a world where there's so much pain? And I pondered that a lot. And that was one of the things that motivated me seeking the spiritual path. But do they fit together? In other words, we know the stories of the saints, and a lot of them didn't have particularly happy times, but did they have joy? And I guess that's the big question. And so what I discovered in my journey is that joy is a part of life, it's a part of the path, and it's a part of God. I love C.S. Lewis. He has a way of succinctly saying things. He said, joy is the serious work of heaven. In other words, it's not just joy as an aside over here that we get to experience once in a while, but it's who we are. It's the nature of God. And if the nature of God is joy, then shouldn't we have a part of that? I think, I did a sermon on joy a few weeks ago, and something really surprised me in the reaction of people that gave me feedback, and none of them, is that people wanted to have permission to be joyous. Not that I give them permission, but permission sort of from given the world and the situation and what's going on. They wanted to know that they could be joyous in spite of everything. We all have our own personal karma that we're dealing with. We have a world that just is beyond what most of us have ever experienced in our lifetime. How can we be joyful? And I think the answer to that is understanding the nature of God, the nature of the spiritual path. And Gautama Buddha is a great example of that. He is, of course, the Lord of the world, which means he's the person that sort of oversees spiritually the planet Earth. And his musical keynote is joy. And he also meditates continually on the Divine Mother. So here you've got a great being that knows tremendous joy, but he also knows tremendous sorrow because he feels everything that's going on this planet in his aura. And to have that mastery, to be able to contain that and not be sort of shaken, so to speak. I mean, it's one thing to meditate on the Divine Mother, which I think a lot of us love to do, but it's another thing to do it while you're feeling all these slings and arrows of outrageous fortune going around you. So we have a lot to learn about joy. We don't want to be afraid of joy, but we want to understand what it is and what it isn't. And I think one of the keys to this is knowing that there's a spiritual joy as well as a day-to-day joy. You know, when you go for a walk in the woods, hey, this is beautiful. You know, a sunset. We live in a place where we can see the sunrise and the sunset on both sides. We're fortunate to see that. And we have a kind of a thing in our family. If there's a really beautiful one, we gather the rest of us together to look at it because, you know, it's awe-inspiring. And awe is something that inspires joy because it's so much beyond who we are. And it's so perfect and it's so whole. I mean, a rainbow. I mean, how can you not feel uplifted when you see a rainbow? You know, God's promise to us. So we don't necessarily have to think about joy as fleeting, but we do recognize that it does come in sort of fleeting moments during the day, a unique type of joy of the beauty of God or the beauty of a child or whatever it is that you experience, purity. I remember once I was sitting in I was in the U.S. Embassy in Guatemala City, Guatemala. We were down there for a particular reason. I was waiting for an interview, be called up. And I was in a room with a lot of people that are waiting to get visas or so forth. And next to my wife and I, there was a mother and a young girl. And actually the girl maybe was 15 or 16. And I sort of saw her out of my corner of my eye, and I have never seen such purity in a soul. I mean, this, I won't call her a child, but this young woman, I mean, I couldn't stop looking at her in a way. I didn't, you know, because her aura was so pure. And that actually brought me joy, that to see that manifestation of God, that purity of God, holiness of God elicits joy. Where do you go today to find holiness? And I think that's a question that many of us asked ourselves until we found the teachings of Ascended Masters. Holiness is awe, holiness is joy. So there's different aspects of joy. But I think there's one part of joy that most people maybe don't get, and that is the joy of the presence of God. I'm not saying they don't love God or have that experience, but the integral presence of God, which in and of itself is joy. And so we experience that even as we experience increments of our Christhood. And Mrs. Prophet teaches that you put on joy in increments. It's not flipping the switch when you come in the room. You know, I'm joyous. It's a matter of assimilating God to the extent that you feel that joy in every fiber of your being. Now, the Ascended Masters, they feel joy all the time. They've got God within them. They don't have low back pain. I mean, they experience joy continually, but that doesn't mean they don't have sorrow because they too see the world. They see the pain. They see the blessed sons and daughters of God. They see God in pain on this planet, but they have the overshadowing joy in them. And I think this is something we can learn from. By having joy, it doesn't mean we're denying the pain of others. It means that we choose to embody that joy in spite of everything else. In other words, because joy is the nature of God, we're going to have joy. Even at the same time, we see the great pain and the hurt in the world. And so we don't have to feel guilty about feeling joy because God is in us and God is joy. We have forward to our heart chakra 24 hours a day, every day of our lives. Linello calls that bubbling joy. Think about that. You think of a bubbling pot or something coming. That energy is coming through our heart. It's bubbling with joy. Maybe it doesn't always feel like it comes out as joy, but when it goes in, it does. And of course, then we qualify it with our thoughts, our feelings, our whatever we're dealing with at the time. But acknowledging that joy is there and that we have access to it. Because if we didn't if we couldn't find it or get to it, it doesn't mean much to us, but we can work at it. The other thing about joy that I think is wonderful is we have joy not because of circumstances. We got a big raise, we, came into some money, or we got a job. Those are all nice things, but we have joy in spite of circumstances. In other words, it's very easy to be joyful. It's like in Imitation of Christ, the author of that says, everybody wants to sit at sup with Jesus when things are going well. But when things don't go well, it's hard to find him around there. And so when we have joy, it's yes, when we sup with Jesus, when we're with him and the sun is out, but also when the clouds come and, life gets tough, it gets hard. And so we have to work at joy. We have to choose joy. It's not going to come and knock on our door and say, oh, Sid, please be joyous. Maybe it does in a way, but we have to really decide, this day I'm going to have joy, because it's a habit as much as anything else. And I don't know where that book is. I quoted it in my sermon the other day, but this woman talked about people's attitude when they get older, and it makes a dramatic difference in their lives. And part of that, I think, is having joy around you and not revolving continually the challenges in your life. You're going to have challenges. If you're on the spiritual path, you're going to have challenges. That's a definition, and that's how we balance our karma. So do we want to do that with joy, or do we want to kind of hang our head down and say, woe is me? We had some years ago, I was at a teaching center, and there was a woman there that was critical of a lot of other people. And it seemed like nothing we could do as a board or so forth would please this woman. And it was really difficult. So we didn't know quite what to do with her. I mean, we talked to her, we appealed to her, but the criticism, the complaining just never ended. So finally, Mrs. Prophet was in town once, and we asked her about this individual and said, what should we do? Because she's always criticizing, always complaining. And her response was, well, she did that with Moses and she hasn't stopped. So you can see how these momentums and these habits and these patterns get ingrained with us. God forbid that we would complain for 2,000 years or 5,000, I don't know, 4,000, whatever Moses lived. But it becomes a habit. And so we have to choose to embody joy, even as we let go of the complaints. You've all experienced people, the first words out of their mouth are a complaint. In other words, something's not right. And it's almost like there's a need to do that. And there really isn't. There are times when you have to talk about issues and challenges and so forth, but we can choose joy, and it's contagious. Joy is contagious, not just the laughing giddiness of joy, but the pure joy. It elicits actually one of two responses. One is, this person says, someone sees this experience, I want that joy to be part of my life. Wow, I look at that person and I see that joy, and that's not what I'm manifesting, and I really want it. So that's one response. The other response is, who do you think you are being so joyous? You don't have the problems that I have. You don't have the karma. You don't have the financial problems. And, you go on and on. And so there's a force of anti-joy. And, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the movie Pollyanna, where she kind of goes around. She's always cheerful and happy. And people are grumpy, especially the minister, if you remember him in that movie. It's a challenge to people. But if we love enough and if we experience that joy in our worlds, then it will grow and it'll spread. And the people will read our auras. Even walking down the street, if you don't talk to them, people read your aura. And if they feel an aura of joy, they're going to be lifted up without knowing the source of it. I mean, isn't that kind of neat when you think, I've always loved the story of Johnny Appleseed. He goes around and throws the apple seeds everywhere. He's not around to see the apple trees. He's not around to see people enjoying the fruit, but he gets the pleasure of doing that. And so by spreading joy, even in our auras, it's going to have a ripple effect and go out and everywhere. We're not naive about pain or sorrow. Jesus walked the Via Dolorosa. We are called to follow in his footsteps. Does that mean agony? Does that mean pain? Does that mean loss? It can mean pain and it can mean loss because we're letting go. We're letting go of those things that have held us back, whether it's our karma, our momentums, or whatever it is. So there's a change that happens in us, and it can be painful at times. But if we keep our eyes on the prize, then I think it allows us to look beyond that. I remember way back, Mother Mary, I heard her say this, which she said one of the biggest mistakes that people make on the path, or the hardest thing, is that they personalize energy. And what she meant by that was, we take things too personally sometimes. And, we have some karma. We just got to get through it and not allow this to create all the pain and sorrow and loss. There will be pain and sorrow and loss. Every one of us have lost family and loved ones. It's no exception. There's grief, there's loss. But that doesn't necessarily mean we can't at some point have joy. Even Jesus said there are circumstances that will come to us that we cannot change. A positive attitude, violet flame, whatever. Some circumstances will not change. It's part of our karma, and they're going to be with us through this life. And he said it's at that point that we have to choose joy. We can't, it can be very sobering when things can happen to you, whether a physical thing or emotional or loss or whatever, but we have to choose joy. And when we choose joy, it will help us get through those momentums of pain. There's a great quote, and I'm not going to read a lot tonight, but this one I love, and it has to do with sorrow, because sorrow is something we all experience. It's hard. I mean, it wouldn't be sorrow. It wouldn't be hard if it wasn't sorrow. So we have to understand that there's a purpose to sorrow. And even as the teaching is that pain is the portal to bliss. And some of us have had lots of pain, but we're a little shy on the bliss. But we do know that we're going to get there eventually. But Rumi, who was a 13th century Persian poet and Sufi mystic, he wrote this about how sorrow is the precursor of joy. He said, sorrow prepares you for joy. Ever think about that? Sorrow prepares you for joy. It violently sweeps everything out of your house so that new joy can find space to enter. It shakes the yellow leaves from the bough of your heart so that fresh green leaves can grow in their place. It pulls up the rotten roots so that new roots hidden beneath have room to grow. Whatever sorrow shakes from your heart, far better things will take its place. So sorrow has a purpose, even as joy has a purpose. And so we don't have to compartmentalize joy. In other words, I can be joyful, but these following things have to happen. I have to be happy. I have to have a certain amount of cash. I have to feel better. In other words, these are the things the world looks better. Then I'll have joy. Well, guess what? That's never going to happen, at least not in this plane. So if we postpone joy, we're never going to have it. And so each day we have to choose joy. And it's not always easy. When the sun is out and you're feeling good. I mean, we had a gorgeous day today in Montana, the first one in I don't know how long. And the world looks different. The world looks different. But then the clouds come in, and then, sure, none of you ever woken up grumpy, but some people have. And you got to really say, no, I'm not going to let that overcome me. And it becomes, you work at it, becomes a habit, not rote, but a choice. And people will say, how can you be happy? Look around at the world. And it's not a denial of what's going on in the world. It's a statement that there's a solution to this world and that we can be part of that through exhibiting joy. And the world is different. I mean, Lanello tells a story about two people on the path. One is always complaining and grumpy because of the challenges of the path, and the other one does it with joy. And he tells us the one with the grumpiness, even though he may have passed all the requirements, may not get his ascension. But the one that does it with joy, even though they don't do everything right, may very well get their ascension. So it's imperative that we understand that. And Archangel Gabriel, I think this is such a telling quote when I read it. He said, the ascension is the ultimate joy. That's the path we're on. But he said, how can you be on a path of ultimate joy without having joy? It's impossible. You can't truly be on that path without having joy in your world. It doesn't mean the absence of the challenges you're facing. What it means is you're going to bring something else into the equation of your life. And that is the joy of God. Not a frivolous joy, not a giddiness joy, not a, slapstick joy, although that's fun sometimes, but a joy that is the presence of God in your midst. And it's better. Everything is better when you do that. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't resolve every problem, every difficulty, but it does give you the opportunity to approach things differently.
Excuse me, Sidney, you got a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
May I read one of them to you?
Sure.
Did Sid just say that sorrow cultivates joy?
Is that a question?
That's the question.
Okay. If we allow ourselves to experience sorrow, not in a woeful, woe is me way, but if we allow that pain of sorrow to pass through us, it will take something with it. It will remove debris from our worlds. It will take perhaps a bit of sometimes sorrow is very humbling. It may take a portion of our ego or something that's part of it. And we have to experience sorrow because we have to understand and feel the pain of other people's difficulties. If we don't have sorrow, we can't feel the pain of others. And if we can't feel the pain of others, we can't expand our heart to the point, whether through joy and love, that they can be helped and comforted. So you can't have joy without sorrow, because it's not really the joy of God. You can have outer happiness, but it is the development of the heart. Linello in his embodiment is Longfellow, the poet for the Piscean age. If you look at his life, the tragedy, I think he lost 2 families through fire and other things. This great soul of light, and the grief and the sorrow that he had, but it allowed him to transcend where he was, to produce this incredible poetry, and then, of course, to transcend himself in this embodiment. So sorrow is freeing if we allow it to be. It's painful, and we shouldn't deny it. We don't deny grief. We don't deny hardship. We don't deny loss. It's there. It's real. But we choose to have that joy of God, even in light of all those things. It takes work. It takes effort. It takes striving. I'm think back when you've lost a loved one or something, it's very, very painful. And sometimes maybe if it's my mother passed away in 94, and it was her time and I felt happy for her, but it's not always the case. So the avoidance of pain and sorrow can't work. I think we heard in the dictation today that pain will take us where we need to go, whether it's to joy, to our ascension, to the path, because there needs to be a house cleaning. And that's one way God cleans our house. And so it's a hard way, but 2 people may go through exactly the same difficult situation, and one may be embittered and angry at God. The other may embrace it and give and surrender to God. And so you can obviously see which one is going to make progress. Hope that helps.
Yeah, you remind me of that story about the guy. I can't remember the guy who wrote the song "It Is Well With My Soul." Remember, he was on a cruise not a cruise, on a ship from England to America, and they had a storm, and he lost his wife and his 4 daughters. And as he's standing on the rail of this ship going towards America, he wrote the song, "It Is Well With My Soul." So he found joy out of that sorrow and out of that loss. And every time I sing that song, I cry.
That's good.
We have another question for you. What pearl gives solace for the departure of loved ones? What words were used? Pearls only talk about the widow's mite. So which pearl would tell us we find solace in the departure of loved ones?
I don't know right off a pearl. I think if you Yes, I do have something to refer. I just thought of something I have to refer you to. There was a lecture that Mother gave, and it's in the Pearl of Wisdom. Let's see here. And it's called When Your Sorrow Turns to Joy. And she talks a lot about the sorrow she felt when Mark Prophet passed on. And I don't have the number right here, but see if I can just find it. But she talks a lot about when Mark Prophet passed on. He was pretty young. He was in his early 50s, and they'd only been married for 12 years, and she had 4 kids. So it was kind of a shock, to put it mildly. And she talked about the grief she went through and what the process was. And I think it's, she said that, think of it, she could see him, on the other side. It's not like when we lose someone, we can't see them, but she could see him. But even so, the grief was so profound and so lost, and what it did to her soul. And it's a lecture it's in a Pearl of Wisdom. It's called When Your Sorrow is Turned to Joy. And I think in terms of losing loved ones, you can only hope that it's God's will that they make the transition at that time, another opportunity for them or whatever. But what is the greatest need of their soul? And of course, we pray for people that pass on, if they have challenges, to make sure they can get to the highest level of heaven they go. You pray and trust in the will of God. And I think that's the solace that I take, is that, the will of God is true, it's right, it's appropriate. We don't always understand it. Last year, we lost a very dear friend, a doctor, never was sick a day in his life. He felt that this, the COVID thing should be dealt with in a different way, shall we say. He helped me when I had COVID. He was a very bright, articulate, wonderful doctor and man. And all of a sudden he got COVID and he dies. And there was no take, and so forth. And I thought to myself, why, God, why? And I prayed about it. And what came to me was, it was his time. And, maybe he had an appointment in the next embodiment where he had to do something. I don't know. It was a loss, huge loss to his family, a beautiful family. But these things we have to trust God in, and trust that God will care for these souls, even as we love them, and that as we pray, it will help them. And I think that's about all we can do, trusting and loving God. And I think too, we know that they're God's souls, they're not ours. And whether it's a child or a spouse or whatever, they really are God's souls. And we pray for the highest for them and trust in them. And then we go about, to try and support that. And, the greatest thing you can do for your family members is to win your ascension, because you can pull them up. And so that's a way to strive to help others.
I want to thank Hopi for looking up It Is Well With My Soul. It's by Horatio Spafford in 1873. If you'll let me share an experience I had after my mother passed, and it was years after she passed, and I grieved a lot more than I probably should have or needed to if I want to go back and have shoulds and oughts, which I don't. But I finally prayed to God one day and said, what am I supposed to learn from my mother's passing? And the answer I got was, when a loved one makes their transition, it's an opportunity for you to learn to give to yourself that which they have given to you. And I found that very comforting.
Life is challenging on this planet. Have you noticed? I mean, it's not that easy. And, we really have to be tender with ourselves and loving to ourselves as we sincerely try to walk this path and to go forward. And, joy can be a chalice for our hearts and for our souls. We sometimes neglect our souls. We think of ourselves in outer ways, and our souls need joy. I mean, our souls have been walking this path and waiting for us for a long time to perhaps do what we were doing now. And, think of that. Think of the elementals. They need joy. It's, they need something. We can't fix every problem. I mean, we just can't, but we can interject joy into it, and it's not a pretend joy. It's not a denial of the pain joy. It's, I love you. It's a presence of God. It's a comfort. It's a knowledge that there are better things to come. Not that we have to wait for everything, but it's an affirmation of who we are. We can't go from being a complainer and a whiner and dissatisfied with the path in life to suddenly becoming ascended masters. I mean, I don't see that transition. You've got to let go. You've got to my wife likes to say, got to turn the dial of your consciousness sometimes. And that's all it takes. And just a recognition. I think that people that complain all the time, I don't think they realize they do it. It's become such a habit. And I think if they knew, if they knew that, they wouldn't want to do it, but it's become a defensive mechanism. And suddenly we get into our psychology. Jesus said, there are some people, if they were joyous all the time, they wouldn't know what to do with themselves because they're so used to being morose and depressed and feeling sorry for themselves and heavy and heavy and heavy. They wouldn't know what to do with joy because they've embraced a lifestyle that is heaviness and negativity. And so you can't do that and experience joy. You have to get rid of that stuff. This is not a path of martyrdom. It's not a path of, giving up everything. God wants us to have joy. I mean, that's kind of a astounding thought if you think about it. Yes, God wants us to balance our karma. Yes, he wants us to come home, but he wants us to have joy. If God wants us to have joy, who am I to stand in his way? And it's a commitment to moving forward. Now, I heard, I can't remember I read this or heard it. I don't know if it was the service today or last week or whatever. I think it was last week. And Mother Mary said, all the light that was in the messenger and all the opposition to her, and that if we had to carry that, we wouldn't be an embodiment anymore. The energy and so forth. And so to hold that balance, that mastery, and to still, you wouldn't know it talking to her, the joy that she brings or brought to the light and the flame. And so you work to acquire joy even as you work to put on your Christhood. It doesn't just happen. And I think that the knowledge that God is joyous, that your Christ self is joyous, should be a pretty clear indicator to us that if we don't choose joy, how can we be in alignment with them? The striving of the path is hard sometimes, maybe most of the time. But, nothing will come of it if there's not that striving and that friction, so to speak, where Maitreya puts us through the grinder, the meat grinder, see what's going to come out. And when we're doing that, we can't allow it to make us bitter. I mean, there's been a lot of people that have pursued the teaching of Ascended Masters to a point, and then they said, I don't like it anymore. It's too hard. It's too painful. I'm going to leave. And so they missed the point, unfortunately, of the pain that would transform them and allow that greater joy in their hearts. We have permission to be joyous. I told a story. This other story I'll tell, which I didn't tell in my sermon, but when I was a new student of the Ascended Masters back in the 70s, I was living by myself in Los Angeles. And I got those days, well, they still had the bound volumes of Pearls of Wisdom. That was the only way you could get the pearls if you didn't have them. So I got this bound volume and I was very excited. So I was going to read it. So I sat down at home and I was really new to the teachings, relatively speaking. And I was reading this pearl by Saint Germain. And in this pearl, this one line just jumped out at me. And I said, oh, I have to do that. And so I got a 3x5 card and wrote the 3 words on this card and had it around with me all the time. And the 3 words were pray for joy. And, I needed joy, and God wanted me to pray for it. So be attentive, be listened, because we put ourselves through more suffering than the path does sometimes, I think. We make it so hard on ourselves that, it doesn't necessarily have to be that hard. Great story. Joseph Janito, who some of you may know, he was on our staff for many years in the church, and very advanced soul. He was with Ramakrishna, and he was always kind of my spiritual hero, so to speak, in terms of his understanding and so on and so forth. And I was talking to him one day about the dark night of the soul. We hear this story, the dark night of the spirit, dark night of the soul, and we kind of cringe. What's it going to be like? Is it going to be so hard and so forth? And it's when you're, dark night of the spirit is when your I am presence is cut off from you. And so I said to Joseph one day, I said, Joseph, what do you think? Have you experienced the dark night of the spirit? He said, oh yeah, I have. He said, I could feel my I am presence cut off, but I kept busy and it soon passed. So, in other words, he didn't make it the big drama that I think I might be tempted to make. It doesn't mean you dismiss it, but I think you understand my point. We do make things harder for ourselves, and God's more than happy to allow us just to have the pain that we need to have. We don't have to have extra pain.
Another God message.
Allow yourself to experience joy, and know that you're going to be dealing with anti-joy. And I think this is what happens. Sunday you go to church and have a great release or a great teaching, understanding. You're all charged up, and I'm going to be joyous this week. And Monday morning you go into work or whatever, and all of a sudden the world doesn't want you to be joyous. And people go, what's the use, so to speak? The use is you're gaining mastery, you're gaining talent. So the force of anti-joy will seek you out for the very reason that you are joyous. But that doesn't mean you can't overcome it. Because what overcomes the force of anti-joy? Joy, of course, and taking that stand. And so we encourage each other, and we understand that everything worth doing, everything worth fighting for, we have to fight for anything that's worthwhile doing, because that's the only way we're going to get there. How did, Kuan Yin become the goddess of mercy? Very simple. She chose to embody the quality of mercy. She also chose to face the force of anti-mercy. So whatever quality we choose to embody, then we're going to encounter the opposite, because we have to be greater, have a greater manifestation of that in our beings than the anti-energy. And of course we do, because God is there. So understand that if this is a path of choice, but it's a path of great rewards. And people will try and take away your joy. They'll say something unpleasant or unkind because they're jealous at one level, because you don't know the problems I have. If you had the problems I had, you wouldn't be so joyous. I mean, that's a classic response, and you can understand that at one level because people are grappling. But what I have seen is that people that have joy, true joy, are ones that have gone through great sorrow and have overcome it. It's not just a temporal or superficial joy.
Mm-hmm.
They've earned their stripes, and they've accepted the cleansing action of the sorrow that allows joy to take place. So as we go throughout life, we know the challenges. We don't know what's going to happen in this world, but we do know that we are working to go home to God. And to go there, we have to have joy, because that's the reward. That's the joyous. That's the goal that we're shooting for. I remember I've used this quote before, but I just love it. Edgar Cayce said, a dead Baptist is a dead Baptist. So if we want to be joyous on the other side, we need to take joy with us, and we need to develop that joy, to nurture it, to fan the flame of joy. And we do that by looking at a flower, praising God. I mean, the presence, experiencing God in our prayers is a joy like no other. And so even though we look for the outer ways sometimes in nature or a child, or a story I told in the sermon, it was the pet, that brings joy to you, because the innocence, it's like that girl in Guatemala, her purity and innocence brought me a tremendous joy because I'd never seen anything like it before. And so when we look for it, we'll find it. In fact, you can even make a prayer. God, show me something that you want me to see this week that's joyous, or that will bring me joy, or give me a greater understanding of joy. We don't think to do that, do we? We think sometimes we have to do it all on our own. But when you choose to embody that joy, watch out, because yes, you'll face anti-joy perhaps, but your life will be different. Problems don't go away, but joy will fill in something there that you didn't have before, and it helps you to walk through them and go through them. And just think, what do we do for others? How do we help other people? Well, certainly our prayers, our decrees make a tremendous difference. We heard today in the service how that difference. But your presence also makes a difference to people. What I found interesting during the COVID situation was, I don't think, we have this natural comfort of the presence of God and Archangel Michael and all these things. And I didn't realize what it was for some people to have that fear of what was, going on, and the threat to them, and their worries and so forth, because they didn't have the comfort of that flame of Archangel Michael, the flame of the light, the flame of the joy, that in the embodiment or out, we are tied to our God self and to Almighty God. So be a comfort to others. It's just like we have so much division in this country and so much disagreement. And souls of light need just the presence of joy sometimes. And we can be that presence, even if we don't say a word.
Great. Another comment in the chat was from Amparo, who said, the joy of God in us is given to others. I am happy with the happiness of God. And then Victorina Peterson asked, it seems to me that joy is not the same, or being joyful is not the same as being happy. What do you think?
That I've thought about that too. And I think there's an overlap because when I'm joyous, I'm happy. But it's not a superficial happiness. And I think, I mean, there are things that make me happy that aren't necessarily joyous. And they're not bad things. They just are, when the car starts in the morning and so forth. So maybe that is a joyous occasion. But happiness is, people think happiness is the goal of life. It really isn't. The goal of life is to find and know God. And that will yield happiness beyond whatever we think in an outer way is superficial happiness. So we all need happiness. Nothing wrong with it. Good to embrace it. But ultimately, it is the joy of the presence of God within us and in others that is much greater than that other kind of happiness. Anything else? I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, it's a good.
I'd like people to tell me what brings them joy from a spiritual sense or other sense.
I like to say something about joy. And I heard you at a Sunday service, you were saying joy is the motor of life. And
Yes.
I was laughing because I had a dream many years ago where I had it was a race car. There was a race car and somebody gave me the keys and he said, here, come on, it's yours. You can have it. Go try it out. So I went into the car. I put the key into the ignition. I tried to turn it. It didn't start. The car didn't start. Then a few days later, I had a job all of a sudden it was just for 2 weeks where I was working in a company that sells auto parts. And on my last day, I looked at the wall and there was a picture. There's a motor, a poster, a picture of a motor, and it says joy, the motor of life.
Really?
Yes, it's true.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're quoting Saint Germain, they didn't know it.
Yeah, that was because I did have the dream first, and right after that, I just took this part-time job real fast, and I never noticed that picture, and I was selling auto parts, and then it says joy is the motor of life, and I felt God was trying to tell me something.
Yes, indeed. What brings people joy?
Larry says the music of the Ascended Masters brings me tremendous joy.
I can see that. Anybody else?
I have a picture of ballerinas in my office that I put up. I call it my joy picture. And these women in pastel dresses and umbrellas are just dancing, and it's beautiful. That brings me joy.
Flowers. I mean, sounds so simple, flowers, but it's just, you look at a flower, a petal of a flower. I mean, it's incredible. And the purity, I think in this world, there's so much pollution, astral pollution of images and vibrations and everything else to the music and the distorted art and the movies and so forth. And when you look at these things, the simplicity of God and the beauty of God and the holiness of God, I mean, you can't help but get carried away, so to speak, to do that. And this is, the world is numb to this, unfortunately, many of the people in the world. But we shouldn't be numb to it. And I'm sure you all know the story of when Maitreya called El Morya and Kuthumi to come immediately to see him. And if you haven't heard it, well, they took off and they were going to see him. And Morya, of course, is very fiery and determined. He goes right up the mountain wherever Maitreya is and so forth. And Kuthumi stops to pick flowers. And, Morya is kind of taken aback about this. Maitreya called us and you're picking flowers, so to speak. And of course, the answer is that Kuthumi did the right thing. And Morya acknowledged that it was taking the time for that beauty and the perfection of God. So that's sort of the balanced life that we all strive for. But I think, when we're subject to so much barrage by energy and negative vibrations, especially those of you that live in the cities, 24 hours a day, whether subliminal or at different levels, are doing that. And to take time to find the beauty of God in a flower or the face of a child, it's very healing and it's very reassuring that come what may, that's the true nature, of this planet and of God. So we can't despair too much for what's happening, but we can affirm who we are in God. And joy is a wonderful way of doing that. And Jesus said, at some point in our lives, we have to stand up and say, I will let no man take my crown of joy. I will let no man take my crown of joy, or no circumstances. In other words, that's our birthright. If we will choose it, that joy is our birthright. Whatever else is in our world, whatever pain, whatever loss, whatever sickness, whatever tragedy, our birthright is joy. And that's where we're going. We're going to the point of ultimate joy, which is our ascension. And that won't fade. That will be forever. But we don't have to wait. We can have that joy now and work with it, experiment with it. Wake up in the morning and to think, I don't know what you were like in the mornings, but I used to be really good at getting up in the morning. I'm not so good anymore. Like check with my body. Do I hurt someplace? Da 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 da, and kind of muddle through. And what's the first thing that comes to mind? Okay, joy. It changes your whole vibration, your whole world. And so, if not now, when? Are we going to wait for joy? How long are we going to wait? Next week, next year, next embodiment? We don't want to do that. We want it now. And the way we want it now is to cultivate it, is to pursue it, is to love God, is to love others. And when adversity comes our way, do what we need to do to deal with it, but not let it take our joy. Because people can become embittered by loss, or they can become transformed. It really is the choice of the individual. And joy is a way to ensure that as you get through something, you're transformed. I had a circumstance in my life some years ago. I wasn't sure how I was going to recover from it. It was the greatest loss in my life. And, it was just time and devotion to the Divine Mother enabled me to get through this loss. And, I was different after that. I wasn't, a part of me was more serious about life and about the path. And fortunately, joy was a part of that. So as C.S. Lewis says, joy is the serious business of heaven. I love that because it seems contradictory, but it's not. As we become more serious on the path and mature sons and daughters of God, then joy is something that becomes intrinsic and part of it. When Paul said, one of my favorite quotes from scripture said, when I became a man, I put away childish things. And as we become a man spiritually, so to speak, as we grow in the Lord through sorrow and strength and service, we become a man in the sense of, not a man, but I mean, advanced in the sense of having that maturity, that wisdom, and that joy of God that is our motor and our motivator in life. And when you see these people, don't you want to be like them? That's what I do. I want to be like them because they have something that for some reason I haven't chosen to pursue. And so that's why I am grateful to the Ascended Masters that they have given us permission, not only permission to be joyful, they admonish us. You can't be on this path without having joy. You can't be on, sometimes, we don't want to surrender things, and that's not joyous sometimes. But once we get through it, it's joyous. Once we pass through that initiation. So again, it's not just having permission to have joy, but we're expected to have joy. And, I've often said or often observed, we can have lectures on the teachings. We can talk about them, we can market them, which of course we have to do. But what changes the people's hearts is what is in our aura and the messenger's aura and so forth. When I saw Mother first time, I didn't know what she was talking about. I didn't have to, something resonated within me. I'm sure you all experienced something similar. And so if we want people to pursue these teachings, then they have to see something in our auras. They have to, at inner level, say, that person is something I want. I want to understand how they got it. I want to go there. Whereas if they don't see that in our auras, why would they ever try? And so this joy is something that can propel this teaching and propel one soul on the path because they experience something, because an act of kindness or a vibration of joy, or who knows what it is. But choose being a focus of joy at the level you think is appropriate. See what happens. See how people are changed. I remember once when I was working in Minneapolis, and they have a skyway system there. And so, it's because it's so cold and you can walk above the street. So I was going out for lunch one day, and sometimes people hand out things, kind of a marketing type thing to people. And there was this young lady that was standing outside of these doors I had to walk through to get where I was going. And she was handing things out. So she handed this thing to me. How you just kind of take things. It's a kind of natural reaction. And as I was going by, she whispered in my ear, "God loves you." I mean, had nothing to do with what she was handing out, And I thought, and it made my day. It absolutely made my day that she was sweet enough to say that. She doesn't know me from Adam. And so you never know what, maybe it's something you say, maybe it's just in your aura, but it's not just for us that we do this, although we're the chief beneficiaries, but it's for others. And I think that we think of the joy of Lanello and his path, it's worth the work. It's worth the effort. It's worth the striving. Enjoy.
A lot of people have answered your questions in the chat about how I get joy, Sidney. Lois Drake said she gets joy from serving and then resting.
Good.
Patricia Wagner says, I have joy and relief when El Morya has been working with me and I finally get it.
We know that feeling, don't we?
Yep.
only taken me 30 years, but I finally get some point.
Elizabeth St. Clair says, I experience joy when I help someone.
Yes.
Hope he feels joy in our mini group studies. Rebecca says, music flowers the sea, the sky undergoing changes, and pure innocent children are agents of joy.
Isn't that true? Wow. Beautiful.
Amparo says she finds joy when I find the path.
You know,
Judy,
Jesus said to make a list of things that bring us joy.
wouldn't that be a great list to pull out on a day when it looks gray?
Yeah, and allow ourselves to experience joy, even when things, I think that maybe this doesn't happen to you, but I think sometimes, we, when things don't work out and so forth, we kind of deserve to feel slighted or, have a loss or someone didn't say something in a very nice way to us and so forth. And we're kind of attached to it. And, you can't do that. You got to let go of it and you have to choose that joy. I mean, it's we don't have time tonight to talk about it, but the joy of forgiveness. Let's just move on, forgive and move on. So nothing can hold us back from that joy of God. I mean, Mother said once, she said, you're all so sincere. That's what she said. You're just the most sincere Chilas, and it's true. People are sincere. I think we agree with that. And she said, but you don't get to experience the bliss of God. And she said, I really wish you did. I wish you had that experience. And obviously we do too, right? And, how do you do that? How do you find that bliss of God? And I think one of the ways is through joy and through loving God and honoring God, because that presence of God is the bliss of God and is the joy of God. And one final little note here is just from Yogananda, when his guru took him into samadhi one day. I mean, he initiated him in samadhi. So you can imagine what that was like for him. So the guru pulls him out of samadhi and they come out of samadhi and they're sitting there. And now the guru looks at him and says, now go sweep the porch. So in other words, just because you experience that joy, there's still things to be done in this world that require our hearts and require our sweeping or whatever needs to be done. So it's called a path because, it is a path. There's different things. It's not a linear pursuit. It's ups and downs, but allowing ourselves, choosing to put joy into a situation, will change that equation. That requires surrender sometimes and letting go. But this is what God wants for us. And it's a real joy. It's not a pretend joy like the world likes to say, or it's not a denial of grief or pain or loss, but it's a supplement to it. And it's an affirmation that whatever comes our way, God is with us. And we affirm that by being like God, because joy is the nature of God.
How comforting is that? Joy is the nature of God. And if we have God in us, there's joy. Thank you so much, Sidney, for that wonderful message and bringing it to us. We've got more messages in the chat about things that bring people joy. I invite you to read them.
I will. I'm glad people are thinking about it.
Yes, they're beautiful. And I'd like to invite you all to join us next month on Father's Day. This month we're on Gautama Buddha's Wesak Day. And next month on the 19th, we'll be on Father's Day. And Valerie McBride will be with us talking about, astrocartography. Am I saying that correctly? Yay, Hopi says astrocartography, talking about where we are in the world and our astrology. So we're really looking forward to that next month. And we're going to approach it with the joy that Sidney has told us to feel every day as we go forward on our path. Many thanks to you. Please take yourselves off mute and thanks, Sidney.
Thank you, Sidney. It was wonderful.
Thank you. God bless
Thank you,
you.
Sydney.
Thank you, Sydney.
Yeah, thank you,
Awesome.
Sydney.
Sydney,
Thank
it
you,
was
Sydney.
great.
Many blessings.
It was
Thank you,
wonderful.
Patricia.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
Patricia.
you.
Joyous
Yes, thank you,
Patricia.
Patricia.
Sydney.
Joyous
Thank you so
Patricia.
much.